Hello and welcome to Garage Talk. I'm your host, David Mort, and this is a show where we talk to independent filmmakers and the stories of their journey. Today, we are talking about a film that is about ready to come out. It is called Don't Touch Me. It's written and directed by Zoë Wassman.
That's me.
The cinematographer is Daniel Martinez. Lead production assistant, Miles Dixon.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And it stars Hope Garcia.
Howdy.
You guys, I appreciate how you didn't make me feel awkward at all during those introductions. You just stared at me. I appreciate that. That was good. No, it was good. Hope, you were there. Miles, you were there. Anyways, so this may be the last real laugh that we have during this conversation. It's a pretty serious film. Zoe, do you want to start us off and talk about the story a little bit?
Yeah, so without giving too much away, Don't Touch Me is an expression of my own fear that I was feeling during 2019. I started writing the piece actually as the pandemic kind of came into the news, and I was already isolated just due to my own situation, my own circumstances. So ultimately, the next time I went into a grocery store, there was nothing on the shelves. There was no one in that store, and nobody would hang out with me or tell me what was going on. And I experienced a lot of isolation, a lot of fear, a lot of distance from people that ultimately I considered to be family or were literally my family, as you'll see in the piece. That was a really big part of my concern, was actually being a danger to somebody. That was something I hadn't really ever experienced in my life, was that I could really be a threat, especially to someone that I loved. So it was intense. I think that everybody here can empathize with that feeling and in its extreme nature, quite honestly.
So do you kind of feel that, so Tony, the lead character that Hope plays, was she sort of your voice, I guess, in this piece, or was it more just sort of some of those ideas that you were feeling and sort of just circumstantially kind of how it came out in the story, I guess?
I think Tony was more of, again, an expression, a character, almost like a vessel. And you can kind of tell by how covered up she is, so cloaked. You know, she's kind of like anybody in this situation. That being said, the story of the raccoons being stuck in the roof, which is like a large part of the narrative and is a part of the scene that we'll actually be showing today, that's a real story from my life that was happening during COVID. And ultimately was a big part of the inspiration, was like, though Frank and his decisions are not based on my father or his decisions in handling that raccoon situation, though he did ultimately get them to come out of the roof without injuring any of them or gassing anything. So that was pretty special. Yeah, but like that was the part that really was my personality and my story coming into the piece. Everything else I think was more, as I said, an expression of my fear regarding all of those elements, more so than something that I was necessarily in the situation of or putting myself in.
Awesome, very, very cool. So the subject is a very kind of touchy one. I think still very relevant to sort of the world that we live in today. I was talking with somebody just last night, and they said, "Oh, I'm so glad I don't have to think about COVID anymore." And the other person in the conversation said, "What are you talking about? We still have to talk about and think about that." And so, I think, though this was shot, so when did this get shot?
It was the spring of 2020. Yeah. So right in the dead center of it all.
Yeah.
Pardon my language.
No, but it is I think it's still an incredibly relevant conversation happening, and it's enough now. I think a little bit of time has gone by that it's I think a story that we can look at and have a little more distance from, but still the conversation is very, very relevant and pertinent to today. Yeah. Daniel, what was some of your inspiration on how you shot this?
Well, it's funny because we made jokes about how we were shooting a horror movie, and I mean, don't get me wrong. There's some really deep scars even now from what people experienced during COVID, but it wasn't really. The story wasn't a horror film, but it was. We leaned into the shadows and the dark, spots and stuff because it was kind of a scary thing. And Hope wearing all black, that created some challenges. Shooting and leaning into the shadows, but I think ultimately that was kind of what it felt like when we were filming it, because I mean, it was a scary thing going on, and it just kind of came out that way. And so, yeah, no, we leaned into the shadows. We let the moments play out. There's some moments where we had running around with the camera and you know, going through the crowd, and other times when we were on sticks, and we just let the moments kind of become what felt right.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's kind of an interesting thing too, because so it sounds like, Miles, you did a lot of lighting on the project.
I don't remember if I was like, it's not like I was deciding this is going to be lit this way, but I was kind of like the extra hand
Working on
person, just like doing a bunch of random things. Yeah.
Well, so as Miles and Daniel, you guys are kind of getting this together. There is some things that I noticed in the fact that you mentioned that you kind of shot it like a horror film. As I'm kind of thinking about the story in my head, a lot of the stuff in the cabin has these kind of long, deep shots that are full of shadows. So I guess, what was the dialogue between you guys and obviously Zoe as well as the director, as you're setting up for these shots where there is a lot of darkness in the scene, but then also they have a lead character that is dressed largely in black. How did you guys decide to kind of light the zones so that there was the distance and shape, and then that Hope didn't get lost in the shot?
I'm just remembering. I'm remembering one shot, which is like, it's just a silhouette of Will. I forget his character's name, but and Tony.
Frank.
Yeah, Frank and Tony, and they're just completely silhouetted. That's what's coming to my mind right now. It's just like we would play into that darkness a lot. Where like, even so much that you can't even see. It's not about the face or something like that, but it's about more like the dark and light and the environment that's around this presence or something like that.
Got it. Awesome.
I think that those shots, but I think those shots really came together naturally once we were on location as well. Like, despite putting together kind of an amazing amount of storyboards, we made them all before going on location. So ultimately, like, once we got on location, there was a good amount of adapting that had to happen. And one thing that I really want to pump my team up about is that we were prepared for that. We had pre-production meetings, so everybody showed up to that set on the same page, and then, much to their credit, adapted with each other to make that plan work in a realistic way. There was no staunch, it has to be held, you know, we have to hold ourselves to this standard because that's what we set out to do. No, that shot doesn't work, we replan it. We planned it for the next day, we workshopped it until we got exactly what we needed. And it really was like an incredible amount of adapting because of that. Like, we couldn't have had a plan that was perfect, like, going in. But I think we got really as close as we could have been, you know, at this level to having that kind of a plan with this production.
Well, and I was going to say, you know, I'm a huge fan of natural lighting. And so when we would stand, when Zoe and I first went in and we walked in with the folks that were showing us the cabin, you know, at first we come in and there was no lights on, and you could see the light coming in through the window. And that was just a fun look. And so what we really were shaping in that moment was kind of that look, the way it would look when they're first coming into a cabin they haven't been to in a while. It's dark, it's a little bit, you know, kind of has that hazy look to it. Though we planted lights, they were really to give that kind of natural, you know, emptied house look when they first came in, because it needed to feel a little lonely, you know.
Totally.
Spacious.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a comment about one of our crew that ultimately isn't here today, but Walter King actually came up with the idea for that long shot that you guys will eventually see as Tony kind of enters the cabin for the first time. And in spite of having, like we said, the storyboard set out beforehand, you know, him coming in and helping us kind of reimagine these two spaces, you know, this front room versus this kitchen, and the way that the cabin was set up, we were actually able, as Daniel is saying, to naturally light such a transitional moment, such a dreamy moment. And it was really just because we worked with the space. We had people on board who knew what they were doing that really helped guide all of us. But we're all, you know, for myself personally, this was my first experience on a film set. This was my first experience producing anything I'd ever written. I mean, it is not a joke to say that I could not have done this project without every single person here, because I just legitimately didn't have the know-how. So, you know, just having those voices and listening to them, using the people who are in your community who do know what they're talking about in those moments, they've got the right idea, the right call for the space.
Cool. Well, so then Hope, how did that impact your performance then? Because, it sounds like there was maybe a fair amount of pre-production that kind of went into it, and maybe that influenced kind of the decisions you were making, and then kind of coming into the space and changing stuff, or maybe getting from a different angle. Did that impact your work as an actor on it, or how did you kind of roll with those punches?
I kind of just rolled with it. I mean, it was definitely a team effort, so they were all communicating, and I was listening, and it was really cool watching them figure out this shot. And at the time that they were conversing, I had kind of that time to like practice my lines, kind of get in the mood. It was my first time actually staying like on set for like 5 days?
Yeah, 6 days.
6 days. Waking up on set. It was totally good for like my character though, because I was worried. It's like I had to portray this character with a mask on.
Yeah.
But I mean, there are times where I don't have, the shield and all that. But being on set, I feel like contributed a lot to my performance. I feel like it was easier. But as far as like the transitions and getting the set up, I feel like everybody really worked together. I didn't really do anything. I kind of just stood around and watched, but
You basically were costuming technician.
yeah,
Young man, like
had some coffee. I was like, whatever. But they were working together to create a really, I think, beautiful film.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So we do have a clip here. And Zoe, do you want to kind of lead us into what we're going to see?
Yeah, it's a bit of a pivotal moment in the story. That being said, I think it really shows some of the more interpersonal relationships that are a bit of a focus throughout the film. And it has a lot of subtext, which was partly why I chose it. Plus, it was like one of the hardest days for crew, honestly, was shooting this scene that you're about to see. We were out in the woods on day 5. Everyone's sore. After now having the camera, actually, that was Daniel sold to me from this project, I've used it now for 1 day. Actually, a shoot that took 2 days in a row, and now I'm like, how did he do it? How did he keep showing up? How did he let me reposition that camera so many times in the middle of just literal underbrush? Like, it was obscene, honestly, but I love these shots. I could not be happier. And there's 6 people out in those woods that you're about to see with bounces on different leaves. I mean, it was just ridiculous, but ultimately it was so worth it.
Yeah.
It was so worth it. And I'm so happy that everybody did take the time and did deal with the soreness and did spend freaking 70 unpaid volunteer hours on set. I mean, for one shoot, I mean, that's just one section of the filming. Countless volunteer hours went into this. This scene just really, to me, was such a good bonding experience. / just like, how could you all be listening to me still? I'm so thankful you are. Anyway.
All right, well, let's take a look.
So, we'll wait till she leaves, and then we'll plant the fir. I did a little research. If Mama Raccoon believes her babies have been found by another raccoon, and she'll relocate them to some hidey hole that is, hopefully, not your Nana's roof.
Seems like a lot of trouble.
Yeah, well, some fights are worth it. Hell, some fights never should have been fights at all. Some ways I handle on things just, well, they just ain't right.
Welcome back. What an amazing scene that was. A question that I think I had kind of throughout almost all of the watching of this film. So there are some very conscious decisions about when Hope is in the full mask and not in the mask. And I guess the kind of the first question is for Hope, but also Zoe, I think your input's really important in this as well, is So a large part of what an actor does when they're emoting is their face. It's how they speak. It's their facial expressions. In film, eyes are incredibly important. And in a large part of this film, Hope has a very strong barrier against all of those things. And so what was that process like as an actor? And then in terms of directing an actor, what was that like?
It was mostly just like using my body to act. And even that was kind of stiff, but I feel like that represents who Toni was at the time. Like that whole dealio was her barrier, like literally. I mean, to keep her safe, to keep people out, emotionally and like physically. So it was really challenging. There's a couple scenes where I had to deliver pretty strongly through the mask, and I delivered pretty all right, I guess. Thank you.
Yeah, you did.
Thank you.
You were awesome.
Thanks.
I would love to add something to that. So from the first day that I met Hope, she is when she says stuff, she's a lot of movement. So there really couldn't, no, seriously, a lot, maybe a hard way of explaining it. But so like I couldn't think of anybody that would be better to act with a mask on, because when she says stuff, she'll tilt her head a certain way. So you're just like, oh, okay, I get it,
Yeah.
And so having that mask on, she did such a great job of using
dude.
body movement to show what Toni was going through,
thanks,
So yeah, just something I noticed, and just again, yeah, did outstanding on there.
Thanks,
Sorry,
man.
Didn't mean to
Don't
jump
be
in there.
sorry. That's like so nice.
Funnily enough, the moment that got me, like I cried with Hope, was actually, not to spoil anything, but the Carolyn and the grandmother in the bedroom with Toni scene, which will mean something to all of you eventually. But it's a scene that's extremely emotional that she has on her gear. And it shocked me. It shocked me to have that reaction to her performance under those circumstances. And it was genuine. Honestly, I mean, maybe it was 5 days of exhaustion
It's all building up. No.
to this moment. But in a very real way for me, it was highlighting some of the deepest fears that I was, obviously internalizing and externalizing through this piece. And she's got her face fully covered up. You don't see any of what she's going through, but you don't need to. You see someone's reaction to it. And I think that's really important for the beginning of the film, actually, is that Frank doesn't know what his daughter's feeling. And I remember talking to Will Brock, who plays Frank, amazing actor, phenomenal person and support on set. I mean, just an incredible human being. But I remember speaking to him about Toni, and it was during our rehearsal for the first scene. And they had a few lines that ultimately did not make it into the final cut, but his reaction did, because the lines stuck. And what I told him, I was like, because he has a young daughter, and I was like, what if you didn't see May smile? What if you couldn't see her smile for a month, 2 months? How long has Toni had this mask on? Yeah. When did the grandma die? Yeah. And that's what I was experiencing in my life, was that people that people at the grocery store, I'm talking to a checkout person, but man, it matters. It mattered that they couldn't see me smile. They couldn't, even if it was only here, there were parts of that became more authentic later on throughout the course of COVID. And you really started to see how important that level of connection was with different people. But man, I did not realize that quite so heavily before this experience with this pandemic. And I definitely did not imagine that I would be so impacted with someone performing like that, with nothing to her, like to help her. That's what I kept saying. I was like, you have nothing to help you here, Toni. So you just got to do it excellently. You have no face, it's like.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things that I found really, maybe powerful is the right word, I don't know. I think powerful is the right word, but what it was for me was that you're kind of watching this film, and it does a really great job of sort of talking about, I think, the isolation that everybody felt. Like, not only from the emotional standpoint, right? So she leaves Eugene, the people she's friends with, she cares about, she goes out to this cabin in the woods. So not only is she physically isolated, but more so than that, she's even isolating herself from her family. She's sort of stuck in this, almost kind of like a bubble And I think there's a lot that does a great job of sort of representing, I think, what everybody was feeling during those sort of early days of the pandemic.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, excellent stuff. And I guess maybe another follow-up question on that is, before we started filming, we were talking a little bit about some of the ADR work that was done on that project. And so what was audio like on that? Is pretty much everything that Hope says is that ADR, or is there some wild audio caught from that? And what was that process like?
No, honestly, we had a very excellent audio guy
Yeah.
during the days that we were at the cabin. Chris Golden, phenomenal audio tech, did a really wonderful job capturing audio despite challenges. I mean, he faced a lot of challenges on that set. I remember him remarking several times that the cabin itself had this sound floor, and as someone who had literally never even like held audio, like I just had no concept. I was like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, it's so quiet out here. Like, but upon going through the audio, it was actually quite an amazing amount that we were able to use by the end, and that was very much so a testament to his ability. And also, like, the ADR that was done after the fact, Hope killed, and I put her through it, man. So like, she killed and then maybe came back from the dead. I mean, we did like some pretty intense takes, but she also really self-directed through a lot of it, where I would just, how did you feel about that? Let's watch it back. And either she was happy with it or it wasn't good enough. And I respect the hell out of that.
Right.
Because if it's not good enough for you, then I know that I'm getting the A+ of what my actor has to give me, and that's more than I could ask for at this level by a long shot. So the fact that you gave it not just on set, not just through a bunch of rehearsals and everything, but also in a booth after the fact, it's just incredible to me. It really is.
Yeah. Jeez, thanks.
I just want to say, I think it's so cool, the device of a character that you can't see their face, because it gives the actor an opportunity to just rely on their voice and their body. Like, as Daniel said, there's so much body language, but also just like, it's almost like you're doing a animated film, or like you just have to, it has to be there in the voice. It has to be coming from somewhere very specific, because you can't rely on the audience to see your eyes and all of this subtext. You have to hear it, and of course see it in the body and the environment and everything. But it's really cool, I think, to highlight the voice. And I bet that was, I don't know, just like a unique experience.
It was kind of hard, actually, because I imagine I see Toni as a soft-spoken person, especially because she was so low at that time, so she just didn't have a voice. So I wanted to speak softly, but then I felt bad because there was like this whole layer of me speaking softly, and the sound guy's like, "What's going on, man?" But obviously we made it work, and it was really cool to see that you picked up a lot of my lines. It was pretty dope. Or Chris did. Yeah.
Now, on the flip side of that,
Yeah.
if you want the most challenging thing in the world to do...
That's my next question.
Oh, okay.
Wait.
Shoot images of somebody wearing black goggles, a black mask, and then a plastic mask over their
Plastic
face.
shield.
That's
That was-
reflecting everything.
Yeah.
That was the main part, I feel like, on set that we had to
Yeah.
figure out, was
Yeah.
like the reflection, dealing with
Yeah.
that. But I feel like there's so many good moments of a little shine on her goggles that we caught.
There
which is
are.
pretty dope.
Yeah, definitely. But there was times where we would set up lighting and we were like, nope, can't do it. We gotta shift this around, because all we're getting is just this nuclear reflection.
Yeah.
Or we gotta be careful if we're getting close so we don't see a reflection of people in the background.
Well, I was going to say, was anybody's job on that production to just be like, oh, no, camera. I can see the camera in her face.
That was my job. I am in the movie, and so is Daniel.
You're like watching the monitor. Oh, that's me.
I look great. Daniel will work it. Honestly, though, the funniest thing to me is that it's never in Toni's gear. It's never actually in the gear where you can see the camera or the lighting. I can't tell you where. You don't find it. Find it,
that's
because
the
I'm not going to
challenge.
give it away.
Yeah.
But yeah, Daniel and I, and actually Chris's hat, are all in that movie. So
Chris's hat.
Chris's pink hat that he wore on set.
That's actually that's a puppeteering trick. You wear like something really bright on your head when you puppeteer, so that way it's really clear if your head is in the shot. So maybe Chris maybe Chris was like thinking.
He had that, man. Yeah, he had it figured out.
Well, I mean, kind of speaking on the topic of shooting it and working around all those things, Daniel, last time we had you on the show was for Driftwood. And there were some, in terms of the story, or not the story, but where the story takes place, right? There's some similarities in that. So parts of Driftwood is in a kind of secluded house, and then there's outside shots as well. But Don't Touch Me has a very different feel to it, and has a very different energy in terms of the cinematography. Anybody on this, but specifically Daniel, did you think about that going into this project and saying, how am I going to shoot this different? Because it has to have a different feel than what that did.
Yes, there's similarities because there's outside and there's a lot of indoor stuff. I think the biggest difference is on the indoor locations, we had multiple places we were capturing, whereas with Driftwood, it was literally one room that we shot the bulk of the film in. So that was something that opened up more opportunities, and we were pretty, there was some shots where we were shooting real low. There was some shots where we were shooting real high. There was some images we captured, we were actually capturing her in a reflection of a mirror. And so we had to kind of reverse things around in post. I mean, there was a lot more opportunities to kind of expand a little bit with Don't Touch Me. But yeah.
Well, I think it's more than just, I had one room versus more rooms. Like in all seriousness, there is a kind of a coldness that exists in Driftwood to that space that is incredibly appropriate and incredibly well placed. So I don't mean that in a negative way at all. But then in this film, it is a space that is somewhat abandoned coming into it, right? But there's more, I feel like it's a warmer feel to the film. There's a sense of belonging that the characters have here that doesn't exist in that film. So
correct. And that was actually something that was kind of decided because, with the character wearing all black, going with warmer feels when we could, again, when she's first entering the home, it was just kind of very drab, very dark and shady. But when for instance, there's scenes where she's up in her room and it's very warm lighting, scenes in the kitchen, very warm lighting, because we needed to find a way to contrast all that black that she was wearing all the time. And so, I mean, it's just decisions to kind of make her stand out a little bit more.
I think there's a testament actually to those two films, because ultimately Sarah Bly, the director from Driftwood, was my assistant director. She's not here because she's working in LA right now, but she was there on every one of the shoots with us. She also had a very distinct color palette in Driftwood of purple, pink, and like kind of a cool blue, versus Don't Touch Me, where like we had a very distinct color palette of like greens, golds, reds, no purples, limited blues. So like what you're picking up on, I think for both Sarah and I individually in the projects was very intentional. Like there was a lot of props that we went out and bought specifically because we knew that if we had at this production level, this is how you get production value. This is how you make your film look like it's on a set, is by going out and buying props, finding a set that works with whatever other costuming you've put together. Both her and I had we were very aware of that going into it, and that this could be something, this use of color might be really impactful as one of the few things that you can control at this level of filmmaking for little money.
Well, I think it's great. It does give, I think both of these films are wonderful examples of how your cinematography, your lighting, your props, how they can take a space and transform it based on the story and how it needs to be. So that's awesome.
Well, and just, something that just kind of came to me when you think about Driftwood, it was a story of two people hiding in a room. And then when we think about Don't Touch Me, it's a story of a girl hiding behind all this stuff. So where the room in Driftwood was very kind of dark and just, that was Tony. And so there's an outside world there in Don't Touch Me that we can see, but inside she's that dark room
Yeah.
where she's hiding inside. So
100%. I really love that interpretation. Like, you can kind of tell even with some of the ways that we planned, you know, we're going to shoot on overcast days here, we're going to shoot on sunny days here. You know, we really specifically planned our shoots too to have the weather help us with those feelings. And in the film, you'll notice oftentimes we cut from warm to cold. You know, there is a distinct, she's here in our memory or she's here in this colder reality.
Yeah.
And there are a few moments where that doesn't apply. Usually it is when she's at the cabin and she's not wearing her facial mask that you see the more colorful version of her life. And that's really well demonstrated, I think, actually by the scene that we watched, because that's her moment of realizing, yes, this may have been a necessity. Yes, this may have been how I survived. Yes, this is how I adapt, but is it right? I'm not here to answer that question, but I think it's one that she feels in that moment because it's taking a lot away from her.
So one of the other pieces of this film that I'm interested in, not only from the storytelling standpoint, but also the kind of how do we film this, how do we create this film, is there is a lot of talk about the protests that were happening in 2020. Yeah. And so there's this plot where we're hearing about it and the importance it has in the world around us, but then also you guys are filming stuff during a protest. And so, you know, just kind of as we kind of wrap today's production up, I feel like that's an interesting thing to bring into the story. So, I mean, Zoe, if you want to lead us off, but then I'd love to hear everybody's kind of take on what that filming was like and what that existed.
Yeah, I think it is important to speak on because it's something that I know impacted a lot of people in Oregon right around that time and just around the nation in general. Like I said, this was an expression of my fear. It was an expression of the things that were being taken away from the individual in our society. That was one for me. I had that taken away from me. I was too afraid to go and actually experience something that was a moment in history. I get to live with that regret, and I know it's something that a lot of people had to live with as well, that they couldn't go, that they couldn't bring themselves to put maybe people who were closer to them at risk for this larger purpose. Again, not here to tell you what's right, but I know what it did to me to miss out on that experience, and ultimately, I felt like it was worth talking about. So did Rick Gates. He was ultimately the producer on this project, and it was one of his thematic decisions to have the modern Eugene climate be a part of one of these shorts. And I think it was an incredibly wise decision because Scene in Eugene, as a series, had an opportunity to say something. Yeah. They had a viewership. They had a community. And I really see that decision as something that was important for local filmmakers to consider in their work. My narrative is large in part just about my own experience. You don't need to, you can focus on the scope that you actually have perspective on. And that's what I really wanted to focus on for Don't Touch Me. This was the scope of my experience. Ultimately an expression of my fear. For everybody else, they had different stories to tell with that time in their lives. But this was what COVID took away from me.
Awesome.
Well, and with regards to the protest part, there was actually a lot of discussion over, how we play into that and not ruffle feathers, not get people angry. Which it's okay to do that in your filmmaking. You're telling your story as she said, but there was a lot of talk about how do we do this? How do we do it and not single certain people out? Right. I think we spent at least a few days discussing, how do we do this? Should we even have a protest within the film? But I think everybody agreed that, hey, it's something important. And we were doing Scene in Eugene, and that was very much happening in Eugene. And so, but there was a lot of conversation over how do we do this in a way that doesn't, number one, come across like we're playing into it for to try and sell a film or something. But it was an important topic, and I think it was played in really well.
To handle it respectfully.
Correct.
To have the conversation respectfully. Because it was, like I said, I do consider it worthy. I think a lot of us considered it worthy, but we also knew that there was, as I mentioned, a scope that we were trying to achieve with it, and we wanted to be authentic to that story. That's why it was there. That's why we used it, was a part of the story and the climate that we were discussing. Yeah. It would have been, in my opinion, less authentic to not include it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. So as we kind of wrap up today's interview, Zoe, is there any kind of advice you'd like to give to people who are interested in making films, is there anything you want to kind of end this discussion on?
I would say if I had any advice, it's be gracious. Be gracious toward the people who are volunteering for you. Ultimately, like I said, we had probably upwards of 15,000 volunteer hours on a project led by someone who had never done it before. And it is not an over-exaggeration to say that it would not have been possible without every single person who was on set. So I would like to end it with just a few thank yous. Obviously, the folks here, I have you guys up here specifically because you were there for every single one of the shoots. Every single time that we turned that camera on, you guys were my people. So I really appreciate just all the time that you guys spent with me. But in addition to that, we had obviously Will Brock as Frank, you know, an amazing actor. We had Trish DeBon, Ryan Olsen, that's his last name. Yep.
Yes.
And yeah, it is.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
And we also had Sarah Blythe as our assistant director. We had Walter King come on for some lighting tech. We also had Peter Lovejoy as assistant audio. We had a couple other folks on board who were kind of intermittently on set with us. Rick, you're behind the camera, I'm gonna point at you, but who's that guy that came and helped us out so much?
Farrell.
John Farrell. Thank you so much. He was literally such a great guy. He was on like 3 of the productions before this one with me. Yeah, so it was really just special to get him to come out and participate with us. And Malachi Schnell ultimately was a huge support for me throughout this process. He helped me with the final edit. He played Lewis. Just an incredible person. And lastly, my brother Zoë Wassman did the score. He did a phenomenal job. And honestly, he did it out of favor to his little sister. So I'm pretty proud, though, of what he came up with. And I'm really, really proud of the product. So I hope everybody enjoys it.
Awesome. Well, hopefully you'll keep us posted as to when we'll have the final version of Don't Touch Me and when we will be able to see it and where we'll be able to see it.
2023 on YouTube.
Awesome. Very good. Well, thank you guys so much. And thank everyone who's watching for joining us today. I really, really enjoyed getting to talk with you folks about this product.
And David Mort on voice acting. Oh my gosh, what am I thinking? We had David Mort as the radio in Don't Touch Me.
I totally forgot that I did that, and then I was watching it, and I was like, that guy sounds really familiar. Oh, wait, that was me!
Wow, he's really good at that. You should do that professionally.
An NPR nerd. No, but yeah, thank you for letting me to come play as well. But I very much enjoyed...
Oh, go ahead. Oh, no, I was going to say, I think that what this kind of, and it's been mentioned a lot, but this is an amazing film community here in Eugene. And, you know, everybody is so willing to give up their weekends, their weekdays, their time, their sometimes their money, their gear, and just come out and help people that have never made, you know, a film before, make a film. It's something they can be proud of. And I think, to me, like when I came into the community, you know, I had never done any narrative filmmaking, and Rick invited me into the fold, and it's just been so awesome. And I've learned a ton, and I've been able to get involved a ton. And I think that is what these films speak the most. All these Scene in Eugene films, I guess all of them, for the most part, they're just everybody in the community saying, yeah, I'll help you with that. You know, yeah, I got some time. Hey, yeah, I'll bring my camera. You know, I'll hold a mic all day long, you know.
The drive to create in this community is pretty remarkable.
I think that's the coolest
And
thing.
specifically to give, and like anyone who just really wants to do it a platform. I think that's so cool because it can feel so like hard to start or something, especially if you want to like do the whole thing and tell a story. It can be like, but it's so cool to have people help. Yeah.
Many hands makes a timer to stop. Or just a thumb. Okay, sorry. And I think on that note, we will draw today's conversation to a close. Community and shared experiences are what bring us together and what storytelling is all about. So again, thank you guys so much for your time today, and we'll see you all next time.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Rick.